How can we bring an end to anger, violence, and disagreements in the world and bring peace, prosperity, and joy? My guest today has written a book that just might have the solution, and that solution is The God Solution by Neale Donald Walsh. I'm really excited because Tamara Zoner and I had Neale on the Spirit Cafe podcast a while back, and we both found him to be insightful and funny, and I personally found him to be like a brother from another Catholic mother. And we got off that call, that interview, and we just laughed, and we just felt so empowered after that interview. And I really wanted to bring Neale to you guys, my audience, so that you guys could have the same experience I did. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let me introduce to you Mr. Neale Donald Walsh. Good morning. Well, I guess it's afternoon, Neale. How are you?
Hi, John. I'm wonderful. Thank you. You know what's interesting? I have a half brother. He's no longer with us. He's celebrating his continuation day, but he was almost 26 years older than I am. My mom's son from her first marriage. His name was Davis, Wayne Davis.
Really? Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
I mean, so, the coincidences in life are remarkable because my mom's first marriage was to a man named Davis.
Oh, really?
And so Wayne was her first son, Wayne Davis, my brother, all my life. And then my mom, they were separated and divorced. My mom married my father, who is Alex Walsh. Oh. So I was Neale Walsh, but my brother was Wayne Davis. So when I see your name come up for me on the screen every time I think of my brother. So when you say a brother from the same Catholic mother, you were right on the nose.
Well, I really felt, it's so funny. I come from a family of 7. And we are all very snarky at each other. We're always teasing each other. And our interview, there was a lot of teasing and poking that was going on. And I just loved it. And I felt so much at home with you and your humor. So it was just wonderful for me. Now, Neale, before you dive into the solution, just real quick, you have written 39 books. And that's really a prolific writer. That's an amazing feat to be done. But one of the things that I found interesting in our interview on Spirit Cafe was how you wrote the solution. You made the God Solution. You said you just sat down and it just wrote itself. And I know that's how Conversations with God kind of was. You wrote down that question and the answer came back and you wrote it down. Do you consider your writings channeled works, or how would you describe that?
Inspired writing. I don't think that I wouldn't say I'm channeled. A channeled writing person any more than Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John would claim that. They would not say they were channeled, but they might say they were inspired to write, what they wrote. I don't think that Mozart would say that his music was channeled. I don't think that Michelangelo would say that his art was channeled. I don't think that they would use that word. But if you said, were you inspired? I think that Michelangelo would say, yes, I believe I was inspired to do those paintings on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And by the way, if you've ever seen those paintings on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, you'd be inspired too, just looking at them, much less painting them. And Mozart was inspired as well to create his music, and all the other great composers and poets of our time. So I think that I use the word inspired, not the word channeled. And there's another reason, John, that I don't use that word. The word channel, or the experience of channeling, is popularly understood to mean that you leave your body, or you kind of like go to sleep, or somehow you're away from your mind, and your body is inhabited by another entity, and who is then using your body to channel through you. That's the most popular understanding of the word channel. Right. And so I've worked very hard to make sure that no one imagines that I'm channeling anything.
So that is specifically why I wanted to ask the question, because I agree with everything you just said.
Of course you do. How could you not? I've sent you a check already in the mail.
Well, I just hope it cashes. That's all that really matters. Does it have the weekly come with the plate that got handed around the church as well, so I get a weekly check like the priest does?
Yes, but my checks have no value at all. They all bounce.
All right. No, I wanted to ask that question about channeling because I agree with you. I think that the word channeling, in a sense, takes you out of the equation, and I think it's important that the connection to source comes through the person who is coming through. And one of the things I'm so inspired by your books and your writings is the fact that it is just a conversation. It is literally a back and forth between Neale and this source, this information, that inspired information.
And I don't want people to think, however, that the book, The God Solution, is a dialogue. That
Right.
particular book is not a two-person dialogue, with a question-answer format, as many of the dialogue books are. But what The God Solution does is, and I worked very hard to take roughly 4,000 pages of dialogue and reduce it down to something that person could hold in one book and could really get the essence and the major, most important information from the 4,000 pages of dialogue, and put it between the covers of one book, and you could read that book and go, oh, now I get it all. It's all right here, which is why I called it The God Solution.
Right. So Neale, the solution. Now I said it in the opening, and I completely plagiarized that from your about page on your website,
which is not unusual because you're the biggest plagiarist I've ever met.
That's there you go. So it says, how can you bring an end to violence, disagreements, and anger in the world? So how did you come to the place where you finally said enough is enough? I need to figure out what the solution is.
I think my year on the sidewalk, and I lived as a street person for a year, was what really, in a sense, broke my back, metaphorically speaking. I was really done with the way life was being lived. Not that I was badly mistreated on the sidewalk. In fact, quite to the opposite. I really discovered how kind and how generous most people are by my year living and sleeping outside. But what it caused me to see was the huge contrast between what I was experiencing actually on the sidewalk and what I was experiencing in my prior life, my everyday life, when I was all part of the business world and doing what I was doing. I was a professional and so forth, and white collar worker and all of that. And I thought, okay, there's something that's simply not working here. There's clearly something I don't understand about life, the understanding of which would change everything. And I became very frustrated with the fact that my prior understandings of life were simply not working for me to create a life of peace and joy, inner bliss, and serenity. I couldn't find that place. I was always in a place of emotional or mental upheaval of some kind or another. And so I think that's what really did it for me. And then I had a car accident, as you probably know, in which I broke my neck. And so I was walking around with a Philadelphia collar, which is a therapeutic device that holds your head up, for over a year. And so these events and the loss of my marriage and the loss of my job, all three things happening at once, that really is what created my movement into a dialogue with God. Now, what caused me to write The God Solution was I was aware that things were not getting better on our planet. I mean, they were getting, frankly, worse. And so the God Solution came out of my observation that, oh, I see, we really, really, really are headed in the wrong direction. And if there's some small thing that I could do, maybe to assist a few people here and there, to see what a better direction might be, I'm going to do that. So I sat down and I thought to myself, what is it that we don't fully understand? I mean, when I say we, I mean the largest number of humans on the planet. What is it that we don't fully understand? The understanding of which really would change everything. And that book came through me literally in a very short period of time. I think the whole book was written in less than a month, 4.5 or 5 weeks, something like that. Wow. And it just, because I would just sit up and what was next needing or wanting to be said just flowed right through me without my really thinking about it. It was very much like taking dictation.
Right. I totally get that. When I do my private sessions with people, I always sit down, and I know you probably don't know anything about my private sessions. I do.
I don't want to know anything about your private session.
Well,
you mean your personal? I thought
the other ones. The other ones. That's an
okay,
entirely.
I thought you meant your personal life. Okay.
Oh no, that's like a puppet show, only smaller. Anyway,
Yeah.
moving on. The interesting thing about the private sessions is, as I sit down, just like you, I sit down beforehand. I just write their name, and whatever I'm inspired to write, I write. And it's interesting to me how that inspired writing can be so powerful for the person you're talking to, and for your readers. Your readers have been so impacted by these inspired writings of yours. So let's dive into the solution.
Can I stop you for just a second?
Please.
I want to make the point that that's available to everyone. I don't want people to think, I get that you have that gift, or that you've used that gift, and that I have used that gift as well. I want to make it clear that everyone has that gift. Not everyone uses it, and even those who may feel that they're using it may not always trust it. Perhaps there's a difference. If there is a difference between you and me and many other people, is that we've come to a place where we trust.
Yeah, I could not
the gift that we have.
I could not agree with you more. I think that we all are divine. I think that when Jesus said, "Greater works than I have done, you will do," and it is your faith that heals you, and all those things, he was telling people that they have the same abilities, which is why I think he used the term son of man instead of son of God, because he's proving I'm a man just like you. And so I find it fascinating. I love that you just said that, because I that's exactly what I speak about as well, is how everyone has the ability to connect to source. It's just a matter of not seeking it, but acknowledging it.
Yes. And then once you acknowledge it, not, I want to say, not rejecting it or denying it.
Yeah.
Because in the earliest days, I would receive such wonderful insight and input that I actually found it almost too good to be true. I remember saying to God, I can almost not believe this, because it's frankly unbelievable. And God said, why? And I said, it's frankly, in some instances, just too good to be true. And I can remember the wonderful response I got from God. She said, Neale, if God can't be too good to be true, who can?
Great answer. Great answer. I love your interchange of genders for God too, because to me that God does not involve gender in any way, shape, or form. And the only reason, Tamara and I joke around, God, consciousness, universe, yada yada, whatever you call it, because I think there's so many different forms. I use God because Mom was Catholic, and I don't want to make her mad. So even though she's far gone, but I love what you're saying. No, I do have a question before we dive into the solution.
Not just multiple genders, but every other identity as well.
I agree with you.
Every other different skin color, every other proclivity. There are no differences within the fabric of godliness. So we don't have God the white person, God the male, God the female, God the person of a different color skin. We don't have God the conservative, God the liberal, although conservatives think that God is conservative and not liberal. But we don't have, so there are no differences, and therefore differences do not have to create divisions. Contrasts do not have to create conflict. Right. And we find that variance does not have to produce violence.
That's a great lead into what I was about to ask you, because anger, violence, these disagreements, these judgments that we place on people who are different from us, where do you think fear lays into all of that, or plays with all of that?
It leads into it because we think that we are alone. Either alone, individually, or at least, at the very least, alone in the group that we belong to. We are in the group called conservatives, or we are in the group called liberals, or we are in the group called gays, or we are in the group called straights, or we are in the men's group, or the women's group, whatever group we think we belong to. We even call our larger groups nations. Okay, we're in this nation and you're in that nation, so leave us alone. And by the way, if you haven't noticed, our nation is better than yours, which is the way we hold ourselves in this world. Whatever group I belong to is the group that I identify with. And if you don't belong to that group, my fear is, because we're so separate from each other, that you could either hurt me or take from me or not allow me to have what I need to have in order to survive. So, and that's really, John, the fundamental challenge here. We think that our survival is at stake in many of the decisions, even the small decisions that we make. Even if we're having a little bit of a, just use a simple example, a little bit of a disagreement, in the home with a family member. But, we think our survival in the sense of getting through the moment and still being on top, still being the winner, or not the loser of the argument. So we think our survival is at stake. And that's the fundamental challenge, John. Most of humanity believes that survival is the basic instinct. Now, I was told by God it's not the basic instinct, but we think that it is. So we serve the instinct of survival. And that's where fear comes from. The fear that if we don't do this, that, or the other thing, we're not going to survive. Our survival is at peril. But in fact, survival is not the fundamental instinct. If survival were the fundamental instinct, John, we wouldn't run into the burning building to save the baby we hear crying in the building. Walking down the street, oh my gosh, is anybody seeing this? The building's on fire. And then we hear a baby crying. Wah! And we run into the building. Scientific studies have shown, psychological surveys have shown that 8 out of 10 people would run into that building without even thinking about it. So if survival were the fundamental instinct, you wouldn't be running into the building, you'd be running away from it.
Right.
You wouldn't jump on the tracks at the station. At the subway station and save the child who fell off the platform.
Right.
You wouldn't, nor would you put yourself in between your beloved and someone who's holding a gun on you. You wouldn't do that either. You wouldn't stand in front of that beloved person and say to the person with the gun in their hand, "You're going to have to kill me first."
Right.
Because in moments like that, our true nature arises, reveals itself.
Right.
And our fundamental instinct also reveals itself, because the fundamental instinct of humanity is not survival. The fundamental instinct of humanity is the demonstration of divinity.
Oh.
That is, the fundamental instinct is to demonstrate, express, experience who we know ourselves to be, who we really are. And if you don't believe that, when the chips are down, it comes up and arises within us. And so when I talk to people, I say to them, if you want your life to change tomorrow, allow every moment to be a burning building moment.
Right. Right.
Turn every moment into an opportunity for you to announce and declare, express and fulfill, become and experience who you really are.
What an amazing statement. And it brings about so many, the realization, because, we always talk, as you said, talk about the survival instinct, and when you were talking about stepping between you and a gun and someone you love, I actually had an experience where I was standing between two vehicles, and my wife was right beside me, and this guy came around the corner and came in between us, and she was between me and him. And it was the strangest experience. Without thinking, I literally picked her up and put her behind me. And I stood in front of the man. And he ended up, because I was about 1.5 feet taller than him, he just kind of backed up and walked away. But to me, what you just said was so profound, because in that moment, I didn't think for myself to protect myself. I literally naturally protected her. And
the average person, and by the way, neither one of us are heroes, because the average person would not. That your reaction was the reaction of the average person. And when the media shows up, as they did in New York a few years ago, when a man literally did jump off the platform because a child fell off the platform at the subway station, and he covered the child, buried the child underneath his body, and found a little bit of a space under the tracks in between the two rails as the subway came through on top of the both of them. And when the subway had gone past the top of both of them, he was still alive. He had suffered some injuries to his back, but he was still alive. The child beneath him was okay. And the media showed up, and they're putting cameras in his face and microphones in his face. And they said, "You're a hero, you're a hero." And you know what his answer was? No, I did what anybody would do.
Well, I love that. I love that. This, it's so interesting. It was about over a year ago. There was one of those school shootings, actually more than a year ago, pre-COVID. There was a school shooting that was going on, and the young man walked into the office with a young woman named Antoinette Tuff, and she was on the phone with the police. And the child was as I say child, he's 15, 16 years old with an assault rifle. And the kid said something, and Antoinette Tuff on the phone with the police she's "I love you, honey. I love you." And she ended up hugging him and taking the gun away from him and holding him until the police came in. And then they interviewed her, and she immediately broke into tears. She says, I just gave him what he needed. He needed someone to love him. He needed someone to be there for him. And I just gave him what he needed. So I think it's in our nature to love.
Of course, not only is it our nature to love, it is who, in fact, we are.
Yes,
it goes past being in our nature. It is our identity. We are that, which is the point made in the God solution.
So let's dive in. Tell us what the solution is, Neale. I'm ready for the world we all want to create.
Well, first of all, let's pose the question, the God dilemma. The book, by the way, started off with the title, The God Dilemma.
Okay.
I called it The God Dilemma when I first started writing the first couple of paragraphs, because the first paragraphs came out like this. If there really is a God, if there really is a higher power, why is the world such a mess? And why has it been such a mess for hundreds of thousands of years? Not just recently. It's never been an easy ride here on this planet. So if there really is a higher power, why doesn't he step in, for God's sake, and put an end to this continuing endless struggle and this wild dysfunction that we are experiencing on the planet? I call that the God dilemma because people who want to believe in God but maybe can't bring themselves to do it are asking exactly that question.
Right.
As are people who do believe in God, who are still praying to God, saying, "Well, dear God, do something, stop this. Why aren't you here for us?" So that was what I called the God dilemma. And when I asked God that question, it was made very clear to me that God's intention, God's great desire was not to treat us like a race, a species of minions, like subjects in a kingdom. Just do what I say and I'll take care of you, but you don't have a lot of freedom. You just have to do what I'm telling you to do. No, God's greatest desire was to recreate itself, that embodied in every sentient being in the cosmos. In other words, to cause every sentient being to have the ability to be creators, which God is the creator. All religions agree on that if they don't agree on everything else. On the fine print, every religion does agree that God is the creator. And God wanted us to be the creator, every sentient being in the universe. So God said, "No, I'm not going to create everything for you. I'm going to give you any more than you want to create everything for your children, by the way. You don't want to give your children every single thing. When they get to be a certain age, they're on their own. And you hope that what you've given them gives them the power to create for themselves the life that they choose to experience." Identical between God and us. So God said, look, I'm not here to change everything or to create your future or to produce events in your life. I've given you that power. So the question is not why don't I change everything? The question is, why don't you?
Right.
So I asked that question. Why don't we? And I discovered the answer was given to me as I was writing this book. That the reason that we don't is that we've been taught by our religions, and there are 4,000 religions on the earth right now. I didn't make that number up. It's an actual number. You can check it out. Our religions teach us that we are best served when we pay attention to what it's like to be divine and that we try to act divinely, that we try to imitate God, if you please, or use God as our model for behavior, which is not a bad idea unless our model is mistaken. Then we're using it as a model for our behavior, a behavior that's not what divinity would truly offer as its behavior. And here's the challenge, John. Most religions teach, and most of us believe, most of us who believe in a God at all, believe in a God who is judgmental, condemning, and punishing. That is, God says, I'm in your corner. I love you for sure. But if you don't do what I tell you to do, if you don't behave the way I want you to behave, I'm going to have to condemn you. I have no choice. This is called celestial justice. Justice must prevail. So I have to condemn you and I have to punish you. And my punishment is not going to be a trivial one. It'll be an everlasting damnation in the fires of hell. Now, John, let me explain to you how that looks in my life. When I was 9 years old in the third grade, I got a real lesson in that kind of a God. The priest came I was raised in a Catholic family, and I went to a Catholic school. It's a lovely place, and I'm glad I really got a good education there. But the priest would come in once a week and teach catechism, which is the doctrine and the dogma of the Catholic Church. And the priest came in on this particular Wednesday and said, children, we're 8, 9, and 10-year-olds in the third grade. He says, let's talk today about the difference between mortal sin and venial sin. And his lecture was the difference between venial sin, which is a celestial misdemeanor, and mortal sin, which is an unforgivable offense. That is, God will not forgive it. It's a mortal sin. It can't be forgiven unless you confess it, and a priest gives you absolution. Then it can be forgiven. And so said God, the priest said, let me give you an example. If you miss Mass on Sunday, it's a mortal sin. And if you get hit by a car, God forbid, on Monday and you die, on Tuesday you'll be in hell because it's a mortal sin, unless you had a chance to go to confession and have the sin removed from your soul. Well, you know what, John? As it happened, on that very week, I did not go to church that Sunday. It would be that week, of course. I went to the playground. I was the right fielder for our softball team, and it was the big game. It was a Sunday morning game. And I went, the team said, you can't miss the game, even though I was the worst right fielder in the history of softball. Nevertheless, there I was at the game. Now, the priest is telling me this on Wednesday, and I'm thinking, oh my God, it's not a venial sin. This is a mortal sin. By the way, if you think I'm making this up, check it out. Even today,
no, I have a matching story for you. I'll tell you very briefly later.
Yeah. So this is not an ancient teaching. This is a teaching up to this very day. So now I'm thinking I'm a 9-year-old kid. I got to get to confession fast, because if I get hit by a car tomorrow, I'm going to go to hell forever for missing Mass 1 week of my life. Talk about filling the pews with fear.
Absolutely.
Using the fear of God simply to fill the church.
Right.
And what kind of a God is that they asked us to believe in? So, I go to church and I go to confession and I tell the priest my sins, and, and I'm making stuff up, John. I didn't make up that I missed Mass. That was a real sin. But everything else I'm making up. I talked back to my mom. I really didn't. I just made that up. Oh, I stole a quarter from my dad's dresser top. I really didn't, but I made it. I had to give the guy something, not just one sin. So I'm making stuff up. So he's, and the poor priest says, okay, go out there, say your penance, 3 Our Fathers, 3 Hail Marys, 3 Glory Bees, whatever. And my sins will be forgiven me. And I'm like, but now, I was raised to think of a God as a God who is a God of justice. Therefore, God will judge us, condemn us, and punish us. That has given me moral permission to judge, condemn, and punish others. And we do it. States and nations do it with other nations. Races do it with other races. Religions do it with other religions. And so we have been raised to imitate the behaviors of God. So the God solution asks a question: what if we are mistaken about how God really is? What if God never punishes anybody for anything? What if God does not judge anybody with regard to anything? What if God does not need anything from us whatsoever? No behavior at all. What if God simply loves us just the way we are? Of course, my mind won't stop with that. My mind goes, okay, fair enough for most of us. But what about, forgive me for making the illusion, but what about a guy like Adolf Hitler? Are you telling me that Hitler went to heaven? Because God forgives everyone, or doesn't even have a need to forgive? Because God doesn't judge anybody? You're telling me Hitler went to heaven? God said yes. Hitler is in heaven. Theologically, upheavaling, the apple carts are being turned over. What are you telling me? What are you telling me? There's not even any justice in heaven? And God said, Neale, sweetheart, Hitler went to heaven because there's no other place to go. I got that you think there is a hell, but there is no hell. The fact that Hitler went to heaven does not mean that he did not have a chance to look at and review his life choices and his life decisions, and to decide whether that's how he wants to experience his next lifetime, and to see the impact of his decisions on others. But he was not sent to hell, because there's no such place as hell. Now I had to decide, am I going to believe in this kind of a God? Am I going to believe in that kind of a magnanimous, totally understanding, unbelievably wonderful deity? Or should I continue to believe in a God who sends you to hell if you miss Mass 1 week? Much less do what Hitler did.
Right.
So I had to make a fundamental choice. The God solution says that if we choose a God who can be defined as pure love, we will embark upon and perhaps even initiate a theological revolution. So the God solution suggests that our solution to humanity's problems is to redefine God, thus redefining our own behaviors by changing completely the bottom line, the baseline of our own human philosophies and understandings. Changing the human ethic, our political ethic, our economic ethic, our social ethic, and our spiritual ethic. Changing our ethic by changing what we understand God's ethics to be, that God's ethics do not require God to punish us with everlasting damnation. Not that God does not allow us to realize the consequences of our actions, but not as a result of punishment with everlasting damnation. That's a huge shift. And if we were to make that kind of a shift in our political, economic, social, and religious interactions, the world would change only overnight.
Right. So how do we get society to make that shift?
By being one of those who causes society to realize that even after all these hundreds of thousands of years, what we're doing is simply not working. See, the biggest problem in the world today is that very few people in positions of influence and authority know what the biggest problem in the world today is. So that we can see the result of it, alienation. We're all alienated from each other. So we can see that, blacks, whites, gays and straights, Christians and non-Christians, the rich and the poor, people of different societies and different nationalities. If we belong to, even conservatives and liberal, if we belong to a certain group, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to make the other group wrong because they're not behaving like we are behaving. And of course, our behavior is totally correct and their behavior is not. So if we change the entire global ethic and we realize, oh, I see, there is no separation. We are all one. We're simply behaving differently, largely because we think that there is separation. But when we notice that there's the lack of separation, the least amount of separation we see, the most amount of harmony we see in our behaviors, which is why behaviors of a family, why most family members behave like each other. Not all, but the largest number do. Most people of the same race, the same religion, the same economic status. People tend to behave the way members of their own, if you please, family behaves. So when we see that we are all one, our behaviors suddenly change and our ethics change. And we no longer live in an ethic that says, you know what, I will love you, but you must do what I say. You must give me what I want. And you absolutely have to give me what I demand. If you don't give me what I demand, I'll start dropping bombs on your country.
Right.
You will agree with me where our borderline is. Because if you don't, I'll kill every one of you. And I'll claim that I'm doing the right thing.
Right.
I'll claim that killing thousands of people is the right thing.
Right. It's crazy. It really is crazy. When you look at the world today, we have all those power trips, those lines that we create, and over the course of history, it's gotten worse and worse. Prior to the Nicene Council, Jesus was considered a prophet, a teacher, or a fraud, depending on who you were. And then at the Nicene Council, he became divine, and everyone else became wrong. And after that point, it was very interesting. It was like you had the Crusades, you had the Inquisition, you had all these "I'm right and you're wrong" arguments. And I agree with you 100% on the fact that we need to come back to the oneness, that we're all one. And not only one, but the tough part that I find in offering the solution is getting people to take the action. And I think that Jesus used to teach in parables, and the reason he did that was, I believe, was because it's better for the person to make the leap themselves than for it to be spoon fed, because then they feel like they're dumb for having to be spoon fed. And so I think that what you're doing in putting this book out is being an example. Look, I'm offering a solution, because let's face it, complaining without offering a solution is just complaining.
You know what, my friend? Jesus offered the solution in 8 or 10 sentences.
Yep.
Even if we think that the other group is comprised of our enemies, even if we think, no, you don't understand, the borderline is here. If you don't obey what I say is the borderline, I'm going to kill all of you because you've become my enemy. But I thought I heard a guy say a couple of years ago, bless your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, and do good to those who would do evil. And if a man steals your coat, give him your shirt as well. And if a man slaps you on the right cheek, turn and offer him your left. And if a man asks you to go 1 mile with him, go with him twain. There's no mystery here. Just listen to what the man said.
And his final commandment, love one another. I mean, that really kind of says it all, doesn't it?
And every person who's been declared a master, not just Jesus, Buddha, male and female masters through the years, have all said essentially the same thing.
Exactly.
We simply don't want to risk it. We simply don't want to do it. You know what? We can't even risk it with the person across the room, for God's sake. Some of us can't even risk it with a person across the pillow. How many of us can say truly that we love the person on the next pillow without condition, without requirement, without demands, without expectations of any kind? No, we have a trade deal going on. We like nations have trade deals with each other, so we have a trade deal with our spouse or with our life partner. Tell you what, I'll trade you this, you trade me that. And on Valentine's Day, I'll give you the most beautiful card you ever got. My darling, my dearest, my beloved other, I trade you very much. And I will never stop trading you. I will trade you until the end of time. But if you stop trading me, the deal is off. We'll call it divorce.
And that's why they call me Triple X, Neil. Okay, I have 3 of them.
Yeah, I'm not even impressed. I've had 6 wives.
Oh my gosh. You overachiever, you.
No, I'm with my 7th wife.
Wow.
I'm on my 7th marriage.
Wow.
And that made me, and I'm not bragging about it. I'm very sad about it, but one failed marriage after the other, after the other, after the other, 6 failed marriages.
Mm.
And finally, when I had the opportunity to be married again the 7th time, I did say to myself, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Obviously, there's something I don't understand about relationship, about who I am, about who she is, about any of this. The understanding of which would change everything.
Mm.
And of course, I told my beloved, you understand, I've been married 6 times. I'm a 6-time loser. She said, sweetheart, you're not a 6-time loser. You're a 6-time learner.
Mm.
How can I do better than that?
Right.
We've been together 15 wonderful, wonderful years. It's been a glorious experience. Finally learning how to be in a relationship where I demanded, expected, required, even hoped for nothing in return. That the bliss of love was in the giving of it, having nothing to do with the receiving of it.
Mm.
If the bliss of my love for another is about the receiving of it from the other, then I'm not loving that person at all. I'm simply loving myself through them. But if I choose to love my wife, just as she stands there across the room, whether she ever does another thing for me for the rest of her life, I love you simply because of who you are. I see you.
Mm.
And I need no other reason to love you other than what I see over there, not what I see coming to me over here. Which is why that beautiful movie Avatar was one of the most wonderful movies I ever saw. In the film Avatar, if you've watched it, you'll remember that there's one sentence that was never spoken. It was a wonderful love story between people who love each other. But there was one sentence that was never spoken in the entire movie. Nobody ever said to anybody else, I love you. Ever. What did they say to each other? I see you.
Yeah.
I see you. And seeing you is enough for me.
Mm. Beautiful. Beautiful. I love that. I love that movie for a lot of reasons. And it really shows how in the God dilemma, how money and corporations and nations and worlds for power can overcome something more beautiful. And in the end of that film, the more beautiful side ended up overtaking the negative. Do you believe that it's in the nature of love to overcome the anger, violence, and disagreements?
It is not in the nature of love to overcome the anger and the violence and the dissonance, because in the nature of love, there's no such thing
Right.
as anger, violence, and dissonance. So there's nothing to overcome.
Right.
See, anger, violence, and dissonance, disagreements, those only arise if we think that love is about reciprocation.
Right. Right. Like you
But
said
if there's nothing that I need to get back from anybody, not just from another person, but nation from nation, group from group, if I find myself needless, then anger, violence, disagreement does not even arise.
right.
By the way, there was another movie that made that point as well. And so he said, the force be with you.
Right.
Because he, and when he was threatened with death, he said, it's okay. I don't even, not only do I need nothing from you, I don't even need my own life. I get that you think that killing me is going to end my existence, but I know better. So go ahead. I'm not even going to try to stop you from killing me.
Mm.
If you think that's what serves you the most, go ahead.
Right. Well, using your own movie that you just said, another line from that movie, which I think is kind of apropos, Yoda says, named must your fears be before banish it you can. Right? Named must your fears be before banish it you can. And I think you said it perfectly. What you're doing with the God's dilemma and the God's solution is you're actually naming the struggles that we're going to overcome to banish. Does that fit with what you're saying?
I think it does. And the faster we decide who we really are, the more clearly we understand that we don't have anything to fear. There's nothing to fear anymore.
Right.
You know, I hate to be trite and predictable here, but fear is an acronym, FEAR, false evidence appearing real.
Right.
Or, as I like my favorite acronym, feeling excited and ready.
Nice.
Or it could be fuck everything and run.
Right. See, when I look at fear,
that usually gets a laugh.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it. Sorry, Neale. I had to go there. When I look at fear, I find fear is one of those interesting topics for me, because when you break it down scientifically, fear is just an emotional reaction to a future event that may or may not happen, with you focused on a negative outcome. Because if you weren't focused on the negative outcome, you wouldn't be afraid, right? You'd be anticipating, like you just said. And I think that it really is an out of time illusion, because it is focused on something ahead of us. Whereas, staying in the present moment, which is something that I took from our last conversation that we had on Spirit Cafe. I asked you, what's next for Neale Donald Walsh? And you said, John, I live in the present moment. I'm very present moment. And I loved that answer so much, because it's so profound, because, when the Bible says, whatever you ask in God's name is granted. And Moses climbed the mountain and asked the bush, what's your name? And the bush said, I am. Didn't say I will be or I was. And so when I hear you speaking, to me, it's so profound that you're saying it in this way, because it just proves that we have to get very present in choosing love and not going and banishing that fear, as Yoda would say.
Yeah, we don't have to, but we are invited to, for sure.
Yeah, right, sure. Love that. So what's the best way to inspire people to step into that?
Demonstrate it.
Yeah. Be the example.
Be the change you wish to see in the world.
Thank you, Mr. Gandhi. So wise.
Exactly. So that's the best way.
Yeah. I often tell people it's not for us to save the world. It's for us to shine so bright that people want to emulate what we have.
That's why we get back to what I said about 8 or 10 minutes ago. That's why it's important for us to be real clear about the behavior that we want to model. If we want other people to model our behavior cannot model a God who is judgmental, condemning, and punishing.
Right.
So the God solution is to not hold the notion that God is judgmental, condemning, and punishing. Then we will stop being judgmental, condemning, and punishing in our daily political, economic, social, and spiritual interactions with another. That would change the human experience virtually overnight.
Right. So it really comes down to us choosing love in the present moment and living that love.
It's my awareness and my understanding, and I agree with you completely.
And I love your use of the word pure love, because people will oftentimes put things into love. As you said earlier, you'll do this and you'll get my love. It has to be pure. It has to be no fear, no anxiety, no frustrations within it. It has to be 100% pure, because that's what God is.
And not just no fear, no anxiety, but no needs.
Right.
See, pure love needs, expects, requires, and demands nothing, because it needs nothing. Pure love is self-fulfilling simply through the expression of it. Frankly, the way we love a 6-month-old baby.
Right.
And I often say to my lecture audiences, how many of you have ever had the joy and the blessing of holding a 6-month-old baby in your arms? Maybe your own child, or perhaps the child of another. But you have that moment when you're holding a 6-month-old baby in your arms. How many of you have had that experience at least once in your life? And almost all the hands in the audience go up. They've at least had it one time. They've held an infant in their arms. And then I say to them, what did you require, demand, expect, or need from that child?
Mm.
And of course, everybody laughs, and the answer is nothing. And then I say, but what if the child had an unfortunate biological accident while you're holding the child in your arms? Then what? Would you say to the child, it's okay, sweetheart, I forgive you? Of course not. You don't forgive a 6-month-old baby for having a biological accident.
Mm.
Why? Because you understand how such a thing could occur. And when God looks at us from God's point of view and sees us here, God also understands how such accidents, which we call our own behaviors, the behaviors of humanity, how we could have such biological accidents where we poop all over ourselves. But God understands, and I want to share this with your audience. When you're into an interaction with another, and their actions, their words, their way of being is offensive or even hurtful to you, do you think you could find a way to simply understand how they could behave that way? How is it possible for them to behave so, if I could use the word, excuse me, so childishly? How could they behave like a 4-year-old or a 6-month-old child? And the question you may want to ask them is, what hurts you so much that you feel you have to hurt me in order to heal it?
Yeah.
But here's what I was told. Understanding replaces forgiveness in the mind of the master. I've got that written on my bathroom mirror. Understanding replaces forgiveness in the mind of the master.
Excellent.
So when you feel that there's something that someone's done that you almost can't even forgive, look to see if there's any way you could understand how they could behave that way. And then, for that matter, look at the string of behaviors of your own life since the day you were born. Have you ever done anything in your life that even you, in retrospect, wonder, how could I have done that? How could I have said that? What was I thinking? And then you realize, rightly or wrongly, how you could have done that.
Right.
And then you realize, oh, understanding replaces forgiveness in the mind of the master. That doesn't mean we condone it, approve of it, or want to repeat it. It simply means we understand it.
Right. Well, Neale, you are always so enlightening and inspiring to me. When I have spoken to you now twice, and then the 2 times I've spoken to you, I've come away with so much to learn from you, and I'm so happy to have had this opportunity to speak with you. For those of you who are listening to this, go out and buy this book, and I'll put links in the description to go get it if you need a quick way to get it. Because I think it's important that we all start looking at what Neale's saying here and start putting these things into our life, put love into the world so that we can have the loving world we're looking for. And Neale, is there any last things you want to share with our listeners?
Well, I think the most important message I've ever received in my conversations with God is what I would leave our listeners with. Because I ask God, okay, obviously there is something I don't understand. The understanding of which would change everything. What is it? And I was really begging God at that point. Just tell me in simple terms. Can you give it to me in a sentence or two? I don't even need a 4,000-page book. Just give it to me in a sentence. Your God, reduce it to one sentence. And she said, okay, sweetheart, here it is in one sentence. Here's what you don't understand in one sentence. Your life has nothing to do with you. It's about everyone whose life you touch and the way in which you touch it. When you understand that, everything else will fall into place. And then you'll realize through the irony of life that, in a sense, your life then is about you because your life will have been so greatly improved and enhanced and filled with joy and bliss. Because, in fact, there is only you. There is no one else. We are all one.
That is absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much, Neale, for spending the time with us. And I know that you have to carve this out of your schedule to do these interviews, and I really appreciate you coming and talking to this audience so that we can, because we're all in this life thing together. And I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, John. It's lovely to have been here, and thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to do so. I hope I have served, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you.
You absolutely have served, and I think we both ought to get out of here before we have a biological accident. Have a great day, Neale. Thank you so much.
Okay, John. You too. Bye for now.
Thank you, my friends, for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please make sure that you've subscribed and you like it, you share it, but also comment below it. Let's get this community talking about these topics and spreading this information out far and wide so we can change the world for the better. Thank you.